Okay, everybody, this is chapter 3, section 3, and we're dealing with inequality still. This section is really the big part of inequalities. A lot of different rules that we got to learn and be aware of, and some different or more difficult types of questions. So we really need to make sure that we're taking some time to go back and look at our notes, study it, make sure you're asking questions, and then be able to do that. Okay, so we're going to solve these equations. The first thing we're going to start off with is this multiplication and division property of inequality. I want to make sure we understand this is the same rule that we'd use when we're solving equations when it was the equal sign instead of inequality sign. So it's just saying that I can multiply or divide, depending on what I have to do, an inequality by some number, but I have to do it to both sides. So just saying I have to do it just like we do with an equation. If I'm going to divide something, I have to do it to both sides. If I'm going to multiply something to solve, I have to do it to both sides. Okay. So why don't you go ahead and write this first inequality, write that whole thing out. And then once again, I go kind of fast when I'm making the videos. So if I'm going too fast, hit pause, get your notes caught up, and then hit play again and go from there. So take your time, no rush, and make sure you get everything down. Okay. When I need to solve this equation inequality, it's x over 3 is greater than or equal to 2. Okay, and we learned back in chapter 1 and chapter 2, I want to get rid of the fraction. And a fraction's a division problem. So to undo a division problem, we want to multiply. And we learned that when we want to get rid of the fraction, we're going to multiply by the denominator to both sides. So in the circles, we're going to put 3. Okay. And remember what that does. It's a really important math thing. You got to get this down. It makes life really easy for you. And it maybe takes a little bit of the fear, I guess, out of fractions. They're not that hard to deal with. Okay, so it cancels out here. You're left with x. Okay, and then over here, 2 times 3 is pretty simple, gives me 6. Okay, and then once again, too, I'm just going to go back so we're kind of keep on top of these rules. I typically are going to be asked to graph this. So I'm going to draw a number line, I'm going to put 0, I'm going to find my value, it's 6, okay? I look at my symbol. In this case, the symbol says it's also equal to, so that means it's a solid point, and then it says it's greater than, so that means I can go to the right, follow the direction of the symbol, and I can draw my line, okay? So there you go. And, pick a number. I might pick 10. So is 10 greater than or equal to 6? Well, it's greater than, so that makes it true. Okay. All right. So we come over to the second one. So if you guys could write this one in for me, please. Okay. So negative 5x is greater than or equal to 20. That's, we've seen these before. I need to get x by itself. This really says multiplication. So that means to undo that, to solve for x, I'm going to divide by it. Now, remember, you got to take the minus sign with it. So I'm dividing. I'll come over here. I'm dividing both sides by negative 5. Okay. So those go away. I'm left with x. I got this. But then 20 divided by 5, negative 5 is a negative 4. Okay. Now I'm going to check this because I need to kind of use this to prove a rule that we're going to have to come up with. I'm going to pick a number that I can use to check it. Okay, and when I check it, I go back to where I started. Okay, so I'm going to pick an easy one. X is greater than or equal to negative 4. So I can pick any number that's greater than negative 4. I'm going to pick 0 because it's easy to plug in. Okay, so I'm going to plug it back in for x in the inequality. Okay, and I'm going to do my math. Negative 5 times 0 is 0, greater than or equal to 20. Well, wait a minute. Is 0 greater than or equal to 20? It's not. Okay, so there's a rule that we're going to have when we're dividing or multiplying an inequality by, in this case, we divided by -5, so we're dividing by a negative number. So if you could write this down, the rule for inequalities, and then I'll pull these off here. Okay, I'm going to have you guys write down, if I can get my pen to work, I'm going to have you write down this. If you multiply or divide by a negative number, you must flip the inequality sign. Okay, so that means like this. If I divide, if that's what I started with, if I divide it by a negative, I'd have to flip it. Okay, the direction. All right, if I had something like this, and I divided or multiplied by a negative, we got to remember that. We kind of tend to get into dividing by a negative all the time, but sometimes we're going to multiply. I'm going to have to flip it. Okay. So that's a huge rule. You've got to remember that. That's going to be just a big, big concept for us as we go through. Okay. Okay, so if you can go ahead and write this inequality and then draw a number line for me, please, and make sure you got 0. I'm just going to rewrite it so I'm not messing with the box, okay? Once again, the fraction is division, so undo division. How do you do undo division? I find what the number of the denominator is. It's a 3, and I'm going to multiply because that's opposite of division, both sides. So remember that all it's doing is canceling that out. I'm left with an x, and I'm just multiplying on the other side. I get that. Okay. So on my number line, I'm going to go find -6. So I'm going to guess. On my number lines there, you just can draw -6 somewhere. And then I look at my symbol, it's not equal to, so that tells me open circle, and it's pointing to the left. The symbol's pointing to the left, so I draw my line to the left. Okay. And there you go. Now I did not flip the sign. We just had this rule, flip the sign, but it's when I divide or multiply by a negative. I didn't multiply by a negative, I multiplied by a positive. Okay, so we just got to keep it straight. What are you doing? Okay, so if you go ahead and write this one down and draw a number line and put 0. Now, this is where you, because you're a good student, you've looked at your notes more than just the time that you wrote them down. You kind of study them, and really doesn't take you that long to reread notes. But we need to at some point be able to recognize maybe what I'm going to have to do with the problem before I even start. I know I have to solve in this case for W, and the number in front of the W is a negative. So right away, that's telling me I know I'm going to have to divide by a negative. So eventually, this new rule that I just learned is going to make me turn the sign around or flip it. Okay, you should know that right now. The other thing you should know is that I'm dividing it by a negative. The number over here is positive, so my answer is going to have to be negative. I know a couple things about my answer before I even start, and it's just by recognizing and using rules that I got. Okay, now this one I'm going to rewrite it just because I made a mess over there. Now guys, you got to remember, this says multiplication now. It's -3/4 times W. I have to do undo multiplication by division, so I'm going to divide by 3/4. Okay. Now over here, you divide something by itself, it just makes it go away. Okay. And I'm left with W, and I divided a negative by a negative, so the W becomes positive. I knew I had to switch or flip the sign, And this is positive on the right, so I'm dividing by a negative, it's going to be that, okay? But you got to remember another rule. So this problem, it looks pretty simple, pretty small, but I have to multiply by the reciprocal, so I flip the fraction, okay? So that's, I'm just going to, remember there's a 1 right there. I'm just going to multiply the tops, multiply the bottoms, okay? And negative 12 over 3 actually reduces down to that, okay? So there was a bunch of rules, different things we had to do. There's a fraction, kind of gives us a little bit of the creeps sometimes. But you can't let that keep you from doing a problem. You can do it. It takes some confidence in knowing what you're supposed to do to be able to do these, okay? So I'm going to find negative 4 on my graph. I'm going to look at my symbol. I forgot part of it there. It's equal to, so that means it's a solid point. It's pointing to the left, so I'm going to draw my line to the left, and I'm good to go. I'm going to pick a number. I think negative 5 is going to be there, so is negative 5 less than or equal to negative 4? And it is. Okay. Okay. I don't need you to write down the whole thing. We're just going to be walking a dog. I'm going to earn $4.50 per dog that I walk. And then I'll need to know how many dogs do I have to walk to earn at least $75. Well, first off, I'm going to use a variable for dogs because that'll change. Okay. And I make $4.50 per dog. And I can make at least $75. So does that mean I could make $75? Yes, it does. At least means that's the smallest amount I can make. So it's going to be greater than or equal to 75. Okay, so we got to talk out loud, kind of see what that means. At least kind of leads me to go, it's small, but really 75 is the smallest. I can make more than that. So I'm trying to find out the minimum number of dogs it's going to take me to get to $75. Okay, so really important that we learn how to read these and understand, you know, how am I going to write my inequality sign? Which direction will it point? Okay, so basically I'm going to go ahead now to solve it for D. I'm going to go ahead and divide by $4.50, $4.50. Okay, it goes way over here. You're left with D greater than or equal to, and I think this comes out to like this. Okay. Now, I can't have part of a dog, so I'm going to have to round it. Now, if I round it down, though, to 16, which isn't really following rounding rules, but if I round it down to 16, I'm not making $75, okay? So I'm going to have to get at least 17 dogs to make at least $75. Okay, I'll actually make a little bit more. Is it? And then the question here: is it possible to earn exactly $75? And no, it's not. And that's just because, you know, my answer came out to be a decimal. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead. This is kind of just a review question here. I've got this inequality. So go ahead and write this one down. Go ahead and draw your number line. And I'm going to rewrite it over here. Okay. So let's make sure we're on the same page here. Help yourself. You know this rule now. I know that right here, you know, I'm going to have to divide by -9 to solve for y. Which means if I'm dividing by a negative, it's going to make me have to flip my sign, okay? So changes direction. That's something I'll say too. And also over here, that I'm dividing a positive by a negative, so that means my answer has to be negative. So I've taken a bunch of stuff and kind of helped myself to start this question before I even did anything. So I divide both sides by -9. That leaves me with a positive y. 63 divided by 9 is 7, but the answer is negative. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and find my -7. And I'm going to put it right here. I look at my symbol, it's not equal to, so I open circle, and it's pointing to the right, so I'm going right. Let's pick a number that will work, and the line's covering 0, so let's put 0 in for y, and 0 is greater than -7. All right. Okay, so that takes us to the end of 3.3. Please make sure that huge rule, you just got to know it. Help yourself out a little bit. Talk the question out before you get going. What's it supposed to look like when I get to my answer? That will help you a lot and gain you some confidence in doing these. Okay. All right, and get a hold of me too. If you're having problems, not really getting it, then let me know.